Your viewing of the veterans is made possible due to the proud and heartfelt support of the Power Workers Union.
All Canadians can take pride in the outstanding achievements of our Canadian Armed Forces. For 200 years, in campaign after campaign, they have represented the very best of our great country. They are famous for their bravery, their determination, their compassion. And most important, they represent a military tradition that is all about selflessly advancing the highest Canadian values: freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. That's the big picture, but our history can also be told one veteran at a time. For every warrior has their story, and that's why I'm so excited about this series. We have a unique opportunity to hear the personal stories of courage from men and women who freely answered duty's call. I congratulate the makers of this series on our veterans and those who supported them financially. They have preserved voices that deserve to be heard. They will be an inspiration for us all, now and forever.
Hello, I'm Daniel Roderick, and welcome to the Veterans for a look at Canada's military history through the eyes of those who are there. We are here at 8 Wing Trenton, where troops board planes to deploy into theater. Afghanistan changed how our military operates in the field. The introduction of the TCCCs is a good example of that. And the TCCC standing for, of course, the Tactical Combat Casualty Care, and it was designed to deliver fast emergency medical care to improve the survival rate of our troops. Cpl Drew Neufeld, a reservist with the Lincoln Welland Regiment, was given that specific training as a TCCC by the regular force prior to deploying over to Afghanistan. This is his story here on the Veterans.
I joined in St. Catharines while I was still in high school. I was 17 when I swore in. I did it as a high school co-op, which I thought was a great idea because I could get credits and get paid to go to high school. So my last year of high school was spent doing my basic training in St. Catharines. I got promoted in, I believe, January 2007. I was about a year overdue. It wasn't really an ambition of mine to get promoted. I actually would have been quite contentious being a private for my whole career, but I had seen some of my friends getting promoted, so then I figured it was about time. I actually wanted to go on tour prior to mine. The only thing that had stopped me was the fact that I hadn't been a corporal, and they wanted to send people who had been corporals for 2 years or more. So I got my promotion in January 07, I'm pretty sure, and then I was actually going to school in Peterborough at that time, and I'd heard that this tour was coming up, so I'd put my name in for it, and I believe there was like 50 people or something like that that had volunteered for it, but there was 11 spots from the regiment that could be sent up there. I'd gone up in early spring, around April, to go to November Company 3 RCR, where I'd be put into a platoon, and those would be the guys I'd be working with for the most part until the end of my tour. When I first got to Afghanistan, I had a pretty good understanding of what I was about to see. I had friends who have been there before, so they had shown us pictures, they had shown us videos, they had given us a heads up on what to expect. And the training we had gotten prior to leaving was amazing. So they would reconstruct villages or reconstruct towns. Even when we went down to Fort Bliss, Texas, which was very similar to the grounds in Afghanistan. So I knew pretty well what to expect, but at the same time, it's hard to explain because unless you actually see it, you can only get so much from a picture or a movie or a video. You actually have to really be there to see it. It's almost surreal. For the most part, the people were, I found for the most part that the people were very welcoming. They were happy that we were there. My favorite easily were the kids. The kids were, they were funny. They were, I guess, you could just see kids want to be kids. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. Kids are going to be kids and they want to have fun. I actually had it while I was there. We were out cordoning off what was thought to be an IED. As we were standing there, before I knew it, I was just surrounded by kids and they wanted to play with me. They wanted to throw a ball, fly a kite, and I got the opportunity to do that, and it was a really neat experience. The kids there, they by no means have it easy. You can see it in their day-to-day lives. These are kids that aren't going to school for the most part, that they get up and they go work. They're, I guess, less than adequately dressed. Seeing kids shiver and knowing there was nothing you could do. If I could have, I would have given them my shirt, but I mean, you can't walk around in a t-shirt. You see kids too with diseases and sickness. I remember we had it in a village in Sanjari. We had this kid come up and he had been rubbing his eye a lot, and we asked him, what's wrong? So my medic and I went up and took a look, and he had some disease in his eye, and they said you have to get to the doctor because that infection is going to spread to your other eye. I'd found out after that he was guaranteed to lose that one eye for sure, but if he didn't go to the doctor, he would lose both. And something so simple like penicillin or a simple prescription here could fix something like that. Knowing they don't have that there was, it's kind of hard to deal with sometimes, because especially with it being kids, you hate to see kids going through things like that when it's completely out of their control. We actually did have it where we had found an IED on the side of a road, or someone else had, and we had to go answer it, or we had to go put security on it so they could get the engineers to take care of it. And my warrant officer, myself, and a couple other guys walked into the village that was right there. And we had asked for the village elder. We'd been approached by a man who had said his brother was, so he would talk to us instead. And we had asked him why they don't tell us about this. And we asked, well, do you guys like the Taliban? And he had said, no, we don't. And he'd said, well, why aren't you telling us about these bombs? He says, they come in at nighttime and they'll do whatever they want. We have no control over them. They don't like them there, but they're afraid to tell us because they're afraid of the punishment, I guess, that's going to follow. I know for a fact there was times where we were there and the Taliban would go onto a bus and kill 20 men just for siding with ISAF forces. Death was always imminent in their lives. My platoon didn't lose anyone. We were actually very fortunate. There was definitely times where we were very, very lucky. One patrol in particular, we were in Pajmal South, and we were doing a patrol with the Pomlet guys. They're police operational mentor liaison team. these are guys that go out and train the Afghan police. And so we were doing a patrol with them. There was about, I think, three Canadians attached to our platoon, plus maybe 6 or 8 Afghan police officers. And that was the day actually we got, as a platoon, our first contact. We'd been shot at, and we all returned fire, and we'd all kind of started hooping and hollering as, I mean, this is what you've trained for. Everyone kind of wants to experience this, I guess, in some point. And so we had been, after that, we had continued on, and we were in a wadi, which is essentially just a ditch. And I remember standing there, and we started getting flooded out, the water level, and it started rising. My section commander, he had been standing on the edge of the wadi, like near the top, and then within 10 minutes, it was already knee deep. And that's when he realized it was filling up with water. At that point, we had heard an explosion. Our Pomlet guys had stepped on an IED. The individual who'd stepped on it was Corporal Bill Kerr, and he had actually lost 3 limbs at that point. We didn't know this. We didn't know what the injuries were at the time. All we knew is there was an explosion and there was Canadians injured. And having a medical course prior to going overseas, my medic called on me, and my medic, myself, and 2 other gentlemen, or 2 other guys from the platoon, had to rush across this field, which was about 60 meters of an open field. At this point, we had already been taking fairly accurate fire. I was on the very right of our little column that was crossing. We were crossing beside each other. We were in a line. And I was on the very right, which is where the fire was coming from. And I actually remember at one point looking down, and every time my foot would lift up, the ground would snap. So we made it into where the casualties were, and we'd gone in there, and I remember seeing Bill on the ground and 2 other gentlemen, or 2 other Canadians injured. One guy semi-conscious, the other guy was, he was conscious. He had already put tourniquets on his arm, and us being alone and the rest of our platoon being in the ditch across that open field, we didn't have anyone to put on security, so we had to use that one casualty who had already put the tourniquets on his arm. So we put him on security, and we had done what we were trained to do. I remember going in there and just saying something to myself and saying, well, I got to get to work. I remember not freezing, and afterwards too, I remember realizing what I had gone through and how well I reverted back to training. I remember too, while working on Kerr, I remember looking at the little ledge we had stepped over to get into this rubble or little compound. I remember seeing rounds snapping near the entranceway as well, and looking out and seeing the smoke trail from our M72s and our disposable rocket launchers. We'd gotten word that a helicopter was coming in to pick up the casualties, and prior to that, in our orders, I remember we were told we weren't going to get any helicopters if it's a hot landing zone, but the Americans, granted, I attribute pretty much saving, especially Kerr's life, to them. We had put in this fluid called rescue flow. He'd actually died a couple times while we were working on him, and that stuff pretty much keeps you going for about another 45 minutes or something like that. And then we'd gotten word that we were getting some helicopters coming in to pick up the casualties, so we had to bring them across that field again. At this point, we had won the firefight. Well, I should say the remainder, or my platoon did. I didn't really have too much to do with that. I was kind of busy with the casualties. And so we had crossed the field, and we had to wait a few minutes until the bird came in. At this point now, the ditch was well past waist deep, so we had to get the casualties across that too.
So during my tour of Afghanistan, we were on a dismounted patrol just west of Kandahar City. During that dismounted patrol, we were attempting to make some maneuvers in through a known insurgent area. I was transitioning to the front of my platoon at the time with my 3rd section and my weapons det to set up a fire base. We were working with a Pomlet team from one of the other strong points. That Pomlet team went into an area that they had previously been into, and one of them hit an IED. The soldier that hit the IED lost both legs from pretty much the crotch down. Through my TCCCs and my doc on the ground, they were able to stabilize him on the ground. He actually, I think, died, twice on the ground. My doc brought him back. While this was going on, we were in a sustained firefight, which my guys performed immensely, and we were having birds were inbound. By that time of the firefight, it was really near its end. We finished dropping what little bit of mortar ammo I had on the insurgents that were hitting us. We were still under some sporadic fire, but my weapons that were taking care of that. The birds landed in what we call a hot LZ. My guys pushed out with the injured casualties. We actually had 3 casualties on the ground, so the young corporal was by far the most severe with the double amputation of the legs and an amputation of the left arm. He is still the first, as far as I know, triple amputee to survive an IED attack in Afghanistan. I haven't heard of anyone since. So now the birds are on the ground. The 3 casualties are being medevaced. They left off, and now the firefight's completely, we've won the firefight, and my guys are pretty tired now because the adrenaline rush after a big firefight really takes a toll on the soldiers in the field. So we started to exfil out, and I noticed that a lot of my soldiers were looking down and not really paying attention to their arcs because now they're physically and mentally drained. So, I had to give them the verbal boot in the butt over the comm system to say, hey, we're not out of here yet. Keep your heads in the game. You're not back in the fob. You could still get hit. And this is one of their normal practices for the insurgents is to hit you on the way out. However, due to our posture, I believe that they didn't bother hitting us on the way out, and maybe we inflicted enough damage on them that they didn't want to mess with us again. So that was my first major incident during the tour.
I remember the one guy I was carrying, the one who was kind of semi-conscious. He, at this point, he was conscious, and I remember normally when you get a casualty, you're supposed to cut all their clothes off, but I remember not being able to cut his underwear off just because I knew he was going to be walking out, and I wanted to save him some dignity or something. I remember not being able to do that, but and for some reason he managed to keep a sleeve on his shirt as well. I cut his whole shirt off, but he was able to keep a sleeve, so that's where I stuck all his personal items like his good luck charms and things. But we had crossed this back, we had gone back through the wadi, and the birds were in, so we brought them over there, and I remember turning around while I was at the helicopter, and it was just me and my medic there at this point. Everyone already had ran back to the ditch. And I remember turning around, we're getting ready to walk back, and my medic falls down. So I'm thinking, well, my medic's hit. So I go to pick him up and just to go throw him on the bird, and he's like, help me up before someone sees. And I just remember looking at him, and it's like, you jerk. Like, I thought something had happened, and it turns out he had fallen down. And I remember too, him and I just walking back to the ditch. I think at that point, we just knew they were gonna be all right, the casualties. And it was almost like we just didn't have a care in the world at that point. We just walked back as if we were just walking down a sidewalk together, and then getting into the ditch there, back full of water. I remember once we got in there, the platoon commander said, we're gonna go. And I asked him, can we have a smoke before we go? And he's like, yeah, you guys can have one. And I remember both my medic and I, they were soaking wet because of obviously all the water, but I always kept a couple emergency packs. So I gave him one, and we had our smoke, and then we made our way back to Casualty South, where they had a little base there, and that's where our vehicles were. As I mentioned earlier about Lucky Charms, I kept a few myself. I had a necklace my mom gave my dad back when they were dating, which I would wear that. And I'd been given a few other things from some of my family back home and my girlfriend as well, and I tend to keep those. Just a little angel on my helmet and St. Michael around my neck as well. Some guys, I think for the most part, everyone actually carried these, whether they'd say it or not, whether it was just a tack vest from a buddy who had gone on a tour prior to, something from back home, a letter, anything. Most people tend to carry these things. I think it's not necessarily just even a lucky charm, but a little piece of home in your pocket. Day-to-day for us was it was pretty routine, but at the same time it was different every day, which I loved. Even where we were staying, for the most part, we would stay in our fob, which is where we were based out of, where we lived in large mod tents, all on cots, within arm's reach of each other. But we made it home. We had a TV in there. We acquired a couch, so we could, when we did have time off, we would be able to watch a movie or something like that. Our food, I can't say enough about our cooks. They were amazing. The cooks who they relieved, they set a pretty high standard, and ours maintained that. They definitely worked harder than some people. These were guys that would go non-stop. If we were leaving at 3 o'clock in the morning and we wanted to eat before we left, all we had to do was tell them the day before, and they would have food ready for us. And it wasn't bad either. Like they did their job and they did it well. That's when we actually got to eat in our mess tent. Obviously, we would eat rations when we were out. You get used to rations. My favorite was macaroni and cheese because it tastes the most like macaroni and cheese. Day to day though, it was, for the most part, our platoon had very few days off. We did patrol a lot or would be on operations. And on our days off, I would find myself busy anyways. In our trauma center, we would get locals, Afghan army, Afghan police, always coming to our doorstep in need of some medical attention. So as I said earlier, I had that medical course, and I put it to use. It was the best course I feel the Army could offer someone, because I know it served me well, and most of my days off I was busy, which helped with the mundane days where you weren't just sitting around, you had something to do. And I preferred it that way. I preferred that we were doing something, because I felt if we weren't doing something, it would have just dragged on and things would have felt like they'd just taken forever. Whereas being as busy as we were, I just couldn't believe how fast time was going by.
It was the morning of the 20th of March 2009, where my tactical headquarters was hit by an improvised explosive device. We were on a 3-day operation, all dismounted at that was organized by Task Force Kandahar, and the 3rd Battalion was given a specific area which we were to patrol in for a 3-day period. We'd been very successful on the operation. It was coming near the end of the tour, and guys were looking forward to finishing their last major operation and then starting to deploy home. There'd been a lot of activity in an area behind us where my company was stationed, and the battle group commander wanted us to search that area before we moved back to where our vehicles were parked. So I came up with a plan, and the plan was that at first light we'd move into the area, search the area, and then move on. We stepped off. I think we woke up. The company got up roughly around 4 o'clock in the morning from our patrol base, and we moved out about 5. We hit our line of departure, and then the 2 forward platoons were starting their movement through the village and their searches. And I took my tactical headquarters into a small compound area where I thought it would provide some cover for us in case we did come into contact. We had security out to our left and right, and we basically, moved the bulk of my headquarters in there, and I said, okay guys, we'll be here for probably about an hour till the platoons finish their searches, and then we'll get organized and carry on with the next phase. So guys were alert where they were, and it was really just a waiting game. The village elder had been identified shortly thereafter, and I had a CIMIC warrant officer with me who was talking to him, or who wanted to go talk to him. And he came back and said, hey, I need to go talk to this guy, but I need a few people as security to come help me. So I looked at my crew commander and my driver who were dismounted with me, and I said, Master Corporal Vernelli and Corporal Crooks, why don't you guys go with the warrant here and provide security? And as they stood up to go help him, that's when Master Corporal Vernelli unfortunately stepped on an improvised explosive device. Him and Corporal Crooks were killed instantly. My interpreter was killed instantly, and there was 5 people seriously, or 5 people injured, myself included. I had 2, the warrant officer and my FU were seriously injured, and then there was 3 of us that had shrapnel wounds as well. So we were medevaced shortly after that. When
Corporal Crooks and Mass Corporal Vernelli were killed, and Major McBride, they were hurt, and Crooks and Vernelli were killed. That was actually my last day outside the wire. We were at our fob, getting ready to go back to the airfield, and I remember hearing an explosion, and we had all just said, "Well, that's not good," because we knew the remainder of our company was out on an operation, one that we didn't complete the operation with them. We were doing a different task prior to that, but in the grand scheme of things, we were on the same operation. And we got pulled off early because we were going home. And I remember hearing the explosion, and we all kind of just said, well, that's not good, because we knew our company was out there. A couple hours before we loaded up into our labs, we had got word that Crooks and Vernelli had been killed. I remember too, so we had kind of just swallowed it hard and continued getting ready to go home. And then just as our ramp was going up, we were literally getting ready to drive away. We had got word that 2 more guys had been killed. And I remember that was one of the most uneasy points in my tour. I was never scared in Afghanistan, but there was only a couple times where I felt uneasy. And I remember that last drive just kind of we all had that feeling in the pit of our stomachs. We did have dealings with interpreters on a daily basis. Each platoon had their own interpreter. We had a really good one at the beginning. His ambition was to come move to Canada and move out to BC to be a painter, just paint houses. I mean, that was his goal. But we had lost him, or he'd been taken out of the platoon fairly early into our tour. This is a guy that had been doing this job for like 2 years or something like that, going out with platoons, where I think they only really have to do like 6 months, but he just stayed out with guys. And we had, there was one of his friends had been shot, I think in the back or something like that, in the spine, paralyzing him. And that really hit close to home for him. And at that point, he needed a break from being out there all the time, which is understandable. I mean, the guy had been doing it for 2 years, whereas most of them do it for 6 months. But we had every time we went out, we had an interpreter with us, every single time, because you couldn't communicate with them, with the locals, without one. You could basics, I mean, what anyone could do with their hands or their eyes, or trying to convey through sound. But yeah, they're definitely an asset. I was involved in some firefights, yeah. I remember in those moments too, you're not really too concerned. It's very surreal almost, but it's almost addicting too. You want to do what you've trained to do. I mean, I had been in the Army for 5 years or something like that prior to going to Afghanistan, and that's what I trained for. That's what my trade was. And I remember in these moments, your adrenaline's going, and but you're remaining calm. And every time, well, for the most part, we would get in firefights, and lo and behold, the Americans would break off from whatever they're doing, the American helicopter pilots, and they'd always come in and assist. And they did a good job, definitely. I don't think it was necessarily the fight we were addicted to. It was, like you said, the adrenaline. After a while, you almost need that. It's very addictive. You know, I actually had that adrenaline crash maybe once, and it was after Kerr. After Kerr got hit there, and I remember it was once I had a shower, and I got out of the shower and I started walking back to my tent, and everything just felt heavy, and I felt exhausted, mentally and physically. I needed to lay down and rest, because my body had just been going for so long that it wasn't until after I had a shower that I think my body realized, it's all right, you can relax now. And having all those experiences where I'd have to perform or give someone medical attention, I had a lot of experiences like that, but I never had that same adrenaline rush or that same drop in energy as I did with Kerr. I started my 6-month rotation to Afghanistan on August 29, 2008, to go to Afghanistan. And that time, my time spent there was an emotional roller coaster. Times where you've never felt so alive, and times where it's hard too. You have your moments where things are just hard because you lose friends. You see the way some of the locals live, the way some of the children, some of the girls are treated. You definitely learn not to take things for granted. Just the small things, like just being able to leave a shower on and taking your time, or having electricity, being warm, having hot food in your stomach. You definitely learn not to take those things for granted. And then, yeah, I remember coming home on April 1st, 2009, and just, I thought when I landed there, things were surreal. You become so accustomed to that lifestyle, and nothing there seems strange anymore. I remember when you first get there, you see some things and you can't believe what your eyes are seeing. But then you get home and you kind of go through that all over again, where it just feels so surreal that you're home. Everything, you remember everything, but it just doesn't seem like it's real. Before coming home, we spent a few days in Cyprus where they let you relax. They have activities set up for you. You can go on historical tours or wine tours, go jet skiing or something like that. But also, you attend classes. You have like 5 electives. You got to pick 2. And I made sure I took 2 regarding PTSD. I wanted to know what was available to me and the warning signs, because I didn't want to have it 10 years down the road, should something happen, that I'm in denial. I wanted to make sure I took those steps to live a long, healthy life, mentally and physically. So we had spent some time in Cyprus, where beautiful country, and it's weird too, knowing that back in the 70s, back in the 70s, that was being fought over between the Greeks and the Turks, and now we're going there to relax. Meanwhile, 30 years ago, I guess our predecessors were there doing peacekeeping, and now it's a spot where we go and relax. And I think that's a great thing too. I think 30 years from now, if I could go back to Afghanistan, if it was stable like Cyprus is now, I think that'd be great for closure. I don't know if there's certain things that I'll ever find closure for, whereas you always hear about veterans going back to Europe after 50 years after World War II, and they talk about getting closure, and I hope I can get that one day. Yeah. Some of the things I have a hard time dealing with is just knowing I'll never be able to go back there, or I'm not going back. Just a few days ago, it was April 1st, and that was my 1 year that I had been home now. And I actually had a really hard time on that day just because the last year has gone by so fast, and it just seems like it was yesterday that I was there. And I enjoyed doing what I was doing there. I enjoyed helping. And just having some close friends die, like Dennis Brown. There's just, I wasn't able to be home for the funeral because I was still in Afghanistan. I think what helped me a lot though is I got to put him on the plane at the airfield. I got to send him home. Someone had said that Lynx put him on the plane and Lynx took him off, because for the most part, the guys that were carrying Dennis were Lincoln Welland Regiment. That was some closure for me, but I just don't know if I'll ever have 100% with that. I don't have a hard time talking about it. There's that feeling in the pit of your stomach, or it's always in the back of your head. Like I had said earlier, I mean, I think about these guys every single day. I think about Dennis every day. There's a picture of myself, Mass Corporal Trevor Brown, who's in the Lincoln Welland Regiment. He was in my platoon while we were overseas. And another guy from my section whose father's in the regiment. There's a picture of us with Dennis holding a Lincoln Welland flag, which hangs on my wall, and I look at that every single day. I would never deny it if I was told you have PTSD. I would never fight it. If someone, I know there's times where I suffer from anxiety attacks, or a loud bang can make me flinch. I've heard of guys who have that for the remainder of their lives. Is that a form of PTSD? Probably. Is it less severe than other forms? Absolutely. This doesn't stop me from living my life as I normally would. If I tend to have an anxiety attack, I just take some deep breaths and I think it out. I ask myself, what am I getting worked up over, or any of that? So yeah, I'm sure there's a part of me that deals with that. It's not even on a daily basis either. I've had it a few times where I'm told I talk in my sleep, whether I'm yelling get down," or mumbling something. And now that I think of that too, I remember hearing that they say you won't really dream about it until about 3 months after the fact. And it was about 3 months to the day where I remember I was having a dream, and I couldn't remember what the dream was, but I was there. And I remember waking up and looking around because I had no idea where I was. I thought I was actually back in Afghanistan. It took me a moment to realize that I was in my own bed. And this was 3 months after I'd been home. I tend to not remember the dreams, but I get told that I talk or yell in my sleep in these cases sometimes. And it's not often, but it does happen. I guess war in general. I know in the past there have been times where it's been, I guess, less justified than other cases. I think Afghanistan especially is justified, seeing what I've seen the positive changes. And you don't get that through the news. I always tell people a bad story makes a good story, Bad news makes good news. That's what you really hear about, and it's unfortunate because you don't see the good things that do come from us being over there, or anywhere for that matter. There's so many positive things that are going on there that you just don't know about. And I feel like we're justified in doing what we're doing. There's not a day that goes by where I don't think about Afghanistan and the guys that we lost there and guys that were hurt. I think about it every day. I think seeing as it was such a big part of my life, and something so extravagant in my life, that there won't be a day that I don't go by and don't think of these guys that we lost and guys that were hurt. If I could talk to Warrant Officer Dennis Brown, or Corporal Crooks, or Master Corporal Vernelli, or any of them, I'd want to tell them that they did a great job, and rest in peace, and you did your job, you did it well, and thank you. If I could pass anything on to future Canadians, it's a good question. Support your troops. You don't have to necessarily support the mission, but support them in what they're doing. These are guys that are protecting your freedoms, and love your country, really. For me, it was an honor to serve in our country's army. Yeah, just support your troops and love your country, because that's really what it's about.
Drew's tour in Afghanistan changed him, giving him a better appreciation of what we have here in Canada and what our men and women in uniform have to do to ensure that that way of life is preserved. Remember, the best way to pay tribute to those young men and women who serve this great nation is to take the time to hear the stories of what they had gone through to make this world a better place for all to live in. Thank you for joining us and watching The Veterans.